Hello Internet, Taliesin here. Bit of an unusual video this, as many of you know. In this glorious post-Dragonflight announcement phase, lots of developers have been doing lots of interviews, giving more details and insights on the expansion to come. Last week we were lucky enough to be asked to host a Twitter Spaces Roundtable interview with game director Ian Hazzikostas and narrative lead Steve Danuser, presenting them with questions from the community and, you know, maybe a couple of our own. None of us had ever done anything on Twitter Spaces before, but I think it went really well. 20,000 people listened live. I think 60,000 or something listened since, but I know it being a Twitter-specific thing does prevent a lot of people ever getting to actually listen to it, or at least make it a bit more difficult. And that would be a shame, because this was genuinely an incredibly insightful interview, and an interview full of answers that the community are going to be very excited about, particularly when it comes to talking about some of the most important features of the upcoming expansion, like how account-wide gameplay systems and unlocks and currencies will be. I think you're going to really like the answer. Exactly how Dragonflight will work and what effect that will have on standard flying in Dragonflight. Really tight details on exactly how the new race, Dracthyr, and class, Evoker, are going to work. And obviously we're going to really pick it apart in the weekly reset this week on the main channel, as well as the other big infuse that happened this week too. But this channel, T&E TV, just seems like the perfect place to put this recording. So I hope you enjoy it. It really is one of those ones where you're just going to have it on the background, maybe late at night if you can't sleep, and let Ian Hazzikostas' dulcet tones carry you gently into unconsciousness. Or, you know, maybe listen to it on the way to work, I don't know. Hello and welcome. I hope I can be heard. Welcome to Twitter Spaces, and welcome to a developer Twitter space. I wonder if I can be heard. I'm just going to check first before I say all the interesting things. I don't want to blow the interesting things, right? Before we know what's going on. Is Ian Hazzikostas in the house? Is Steve Danuser in the house?
I am indeed, and I can hear you.
Oh, thank goodness. Okay, that's good. This is a really good start. We are in the future right here on Twitter Spaces, trying out a new thing to allow you, the World of Warcraft community, to get your questions to, two of the big boys in the World of Warcraft space, Ian Hazzikostas and Steve Danuser. Can you say hello, boys?
Hello, everybody. Good to be here.
Hey, everybody. And yeah, this is a new Twitter adventure.
Yeah, it's awesome. So you'll be very pleased to know that these questions that we'll be handling today don't come from me. This is very much a kind of, rather than a sort of a YouTube interview or stream interview or something like that, this is very much a recreation of what a Blizz Q&A would be like, I guess, with me and hopefully Evertel in just a moment or two hosting and sort of presenting your questions that we've gathered from social media to the devs. The timing's not great with our childcare, so she's just gone off to get the little boy. So maybe you'll hear from him as well. I know that he's got some amazing questions to ask you about his first ever World of Warcraft expansion. So it's super exciting. Just before we get started with any of these questions, I'd like to put something to you, Ian, and then Steve. If players haven't been playing Shadowlands, if it didn't really connect to them, maybe BFA didn't really connect with them either, why should they come back and play Dragonflight, do you think, Ian?
I think every WoW expansion is, in a lot of ways, a fresh start. It's a chance to reconnect, to be on a level playing field with everyone else who's venturing into a new space. And it's every expansion brings new themes, new adventures, new systems. But I think Dragonflight in particular, it's if there's something about World of Warcraft that captured your imagination years ago that you haven't felt was fulfilled in the last few years, I think this return to just core high fantasy exploration and discovering the story as you go, meeting interesting characters along the way, everyone from new races of giants to, of course, the beloved Tuskarr. And I know I'm just buttering you up here, but
wait, there are Tuskarr in this expansion? Wow.
I've heard there are, and quite a few. That is It's a great chance to get back in and check it out. And if you've never played World of Warcraft before, and if for some reason you've ventured upon this Twitter space and are wondering what's going on here, it's also a great time. And I think try it out, judge it for what it is, and I and the team heartily believe that it'll be worth your while.
And Steve, what on the same theme, what opportunities do you feel that Dragonflight has brought for you as sort of a storyteller?
Yeah, you need to not let Ian answer questions first because he literally consumes all the good bits and gives them to you. But yeah, like, he said it well. We've just been looking at this as like an opportunity to dive back into those classic fantasy themes that made us all fall in love with games like this in the first place, and movies like this, and stories like this. The things that inspire our imagination. Having this vast land to explore, you have these cool figures that feel powerful and awesome, and you get to delve into their stories, you get to adventure beside them. It was really just a chance for us to revisit some of these really classic and popular characters in the dragon aspects, and kind of see what's going on with them now. All the changes that happened during Cataclysm and other storylines, they lead to this, and this chance to kind of recapture something for themselves, their legacy that they had left behind so long ago. And so those themes of exploration, rediscovery, of finding your legacy, those are all woven into the storylines that you'll be experiencing in Dragonflight.
Awesome. I want to do these questions from the community justice and make the most of this kind of platform that we're using here. So I'm going to kind of go through them at a bit of a lick, and I will ask you to sort of elaborate where it's sort of appropriate and what have you. And the first that I've got on my list here is quality of life changes when it comes to 10.0. Ian, can you describe how you've kind of taken lessons that you may have taken over the course of Shadowlands and how you're applying them for Dragonflight?
I have to warn you, this is probably not a short answer, because there's been a lot, right? And there's a lot of different pieces to it. Some of this really predates Shadowlands itself. I think, moving on from so-called borrowed power and saying that we're going to focus on evergreen systems like talents and professions, that was a decision that we made really before Shadowlands launched, right? Because we're kind of committing to the general feature slate of an expansion that, pretty far in advance. And that was the realization and the feedback that walking away from borrowed power felt really bad. I think losing your artifacts, losing your Legion legendaries at the start of BFA really got the expansion off on a really sour note. And I think over the course of BFA, we'd realized that everyone was looking at everything they were earning with the knowledge that it was all just fleeting and that it was all going to be gone, and that continued to sour the experience. And so even as we had committed to certain systems for Shadowlands, we knew we wanted to take a different direction in Dragonflight. And then on the quality of life side, I think really a lot of what we discussed last year, a lot of what led to the changes in 9.15 that helped shape Eternity's End, like those were not end of expansion band-aids. That is an underlying philosophical shift in how we approach things like, frankly, valuing players' time, giving them the flexibility and freedom to play more of the game the way they want without feeling like they have to do things they don't enjoy to get at the bits they do enjoy, and really carrying that forward into crafting our systems and thinking about how alts and patch-up and all of that is going to work from the ground up in Dragonflight in a way that we frankly haven't done in expansions before.
I know we're very early on in the development of this expansion, but I mean, there will be people listening to that who want to draw like a lot of hope from it and go, yeah, that's awesome, but who will, naturally be a little bit kind of cynical about the intent behind it. Can you, even in this early stage, can you give an example of how quality of life, maybe in approach to alts, will be better in Dragonflight than in Shadowlands?
Sure. I mean, I think from the start, thinking about what should be account-wide. And the answer is nearly everything except getting gear from dungeons, from quests, the actual item level and power of your character that is their personal journey. But we want to make playing through, linear narrative optional after the first time you do it. We want to make sure that access to content, that things like utility, including, for example, aspects of the dragon riding system. If you are upgrading and improving your dragon riding such that you can more ably traverse the Dragon Isles, redoing that on other characters is not going to be a satisfying experience. It's just going to feel bad that you don't have access to, or you're somehow hindered compared to the experience on your main. I think we're just constantly asking the question of how this is going to feel the second, third, fourth time through, how this is going to feel if you're someone who's coming along months down the line, and solving those problems from the start instead of waiting to do it reactively.
So I hope you don't mind me like pressuring you on this, but like when it comes to dragon riding, for example, would that be an absolute across account progress, or would there just be elements of it that found its way across?
So I mean, there's still questions for us to figure out on our end.
Of course,
Philosophically, I think, there's obviously going to be some quests that you may have to do to unlock the system the very first time you come on a second character. But beyond that, if on your main, your dragon can fly for longer and go farther and has access to an extra active ability, we wouldn't want to make you re-earn those things on your alts. If you've unlocked cosmetic customizations for your Drake, we wouldn't want to make you re-earn those things on your alts. I think really the starting point for everything other than just pure power from gear is that it should be something that you do as a player, and that if you want to repeat that content on other characters, fine, but you shouldn't have to.
That's awesome. I know a lot of people will be incredibly happy to hear that. And will that be in place from the very start rather than something that comes in later patches?
That is the goal, yes. I mean, I think that's what this shift in philosophy means, right? This isn't about, okay, frankly, suffer for a few months and then we'll hear feedback and adjust. We want to make sure that, we know people are going to be playing alts literally week 1 of the expansion, right? Many people are going to get their first character to 70, do some stuff, and then a day later start leveling their next one. And that experience should be the alt-friendly one that we envision from the start.
Brilliant, thank you. And I'm going to skip around different subjects a little bit here just to get you both involved all the time. I want to talk some Dracthyr just for a moment, like the new playable race and class. And we know that they have their own starting area on the Dragon Isles. Steve, can you tell us anything about like the story and the history that the Dracthyr are going to go through in that starting area?
Yeah, we're coming into this Dracthyr race as you're playing them. You kind of come into a mystery. So the thing is, you're awakening after being in stasis for you don't know how long. And this long stasis has kind of wreaked havoc on your memory as a Dracthyr. And all you know is you're in kind of this creche that is your barracks. And you know that you have friends in here, and you know that they're in trouble. And so you work through this experience of trying to help your friends, reawaken them, get out and just figure out what's been happening, what caused this. And as you're going through this experience, you're encountering all these changes, and you realize that you've been asleep for a very long time. And so the Dracthyr experience is really one of discovery, of finding what happened to you, what befell your leader, Neltharion, who was the guy who made you. And for those of you who don't know, Neltharion, who eventually became Deathwing, at one time he was just the Earth Warder. He was one of the aspects, and he was charged with protecting the land. And so you find out that he made you to be a soldier, to be this ideal warrior against some threat that was coming. And through the course of this experience, without giving in-depth spoilers, you will find out what that threat was, and that it's reawakening again, just like you. And the fact that you're awakening now is tied into that threat that's rising. And so you'll get this experience of kind of learning your history, learning what's happened to you, but leaving a lot of mysteries to explore over the course of questing. So you get this cool starter experience that is very evocative and tees up a lot of history. And then through the course of questing, if you're playing a Dracthyr, you'll have little moments throughout the kind of level up and through some of our max level campaign chapters where you'll find out some more little bits and keep putting the history together. And it's going to be really fun to see how the dragons react to you, because they didn't know about you. Even Alexstraza didn't know that the Dracthyr existed. So that's going to be a process of both sides getting to know one another. It's a really cool story. The Dracthyr are awesome and fun to play. And I think the Forbidden Reach, the area that you'll start in for your experience, is a really cool place that's very evocative of the Dragon Isles experience.
We've heard a lot about the zones on the Dragon Isles, and the Forbidden Reach is the one we've heard the least about, but a lot of emphasis has been put on the size of them and how they're these grand, like, sweeping zones that you can swoop and fly around, and how they'll be utilized with, like, areas that are kind of focused on leveling and areas that are kind of more endgame areas within the zone. Are you going to utilize the starting area for the Dracthyr for anything else in the game? Will it be just a starting area for them, or will other players find their way to it over the course of the expansion?
No, it's definitely a place that we'll be coming back to. We're deciding where that best fits in the story, whether it's max level or in upcoming content. But it's definitely a place that has more mysteries left in it after you leave this place as a Dracthyr. So there's a lot of it's a great space and will be fun to adventure in later in the game.
So would it be fair to say it's not just a starting zone? It will kind of play a part in the wider expansion as well.
I think it's fair to say it's part of the world, right? I think, analogies to how the Vault of the Wardens and that Isle worked in Legion are valid. I mean, if you are a Dracthyr, your journey begins here and your story begins here. But for everyone else in Azeroth, this is a place that's full of mysteries that will be interesting to visit down the line and delve into the aftermath.
Awesome. And sorry for like the flip-flopping that we're going to do on subjects here, but I miss you when you're not talking for a while, and I want to kind of like spread out a little bit. Going back to kind of quality of life changes and sort of account-wide things, there's going to be a change with reputation, we understand, when it comes to Dragonflight, and it's going to be based more on what we'd recognize as a Renown system at the moment. Would you like to elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's another example of evolution of some of our evergreen systems. I wouldn't call this like a full-blown revamp, but I think it's us taking a step back and looking at how we present reputation, which hasn't really changed since 2004. It's a bar that has these very fixed thresholds that go up, they almost double, 3,000, 6,000, 12,000, etc. If you want to know what a reputation gives you, sometimes it's buried in achievements, sometimes you have to find a quartermaster and look through their list of stuff. And I think one of the things we did really like about how Covenants played out in Shadowlands was just the visual UI of the Renown track and understanding your progression towards stuff. And while we don't plan for reputations, and I think definitively reputations in Dragonflight will not give you the sort of, alternate progression like Soulbind levels or whatever that they did in Shadowlands, I think it is a very elegant way of laying out the rewards that you have to look forward to. Everything from cosmetics, unlocks of additional content, items which are of course power, but not auxiliary powers, core power for endgame outdoor world players, and so forth. And I think we have what we're calling, this is maybe not a final name, but just shorthand internally, major factions. Not every reputation will work this way, but there are some major factions that we'll encounter in the Dragon Isles. And as we aid them and as we work on their behalf, we'll be progressing along this track with a hopefully just clearer and all around more elegant reward progression.
And one of the nice, just to add on, one of the nice things about that is that each of those major factions kind of stands on their own. So unlike the Covenants that you kind of picked one and that was your path, these are things that you can dive in and out of. So you can choose if you want to focus on one, focus on another one, switch around, play lots of things. It's just gives you more choices as a player of what kind of what path you want to engage with and which reputations really are most appealing to you for a particular character.
Sure. So is it the case that there's like, I don't know, a set number of world quests or kind of daily quests or sort of weekly quests that are available, and you choose which kind of faction you want to do those for and improve your reputation with? Or is it possible to increase your reputation with all the factions kind of equally at the same time?
I think that's one of those things that, again, details aren't 100% set in stone. We're going to evolve the pacing based on feedback that we get from beta. But I think the current thought is much more flexibility. And I think part of why Covenants and Renown progression in Covenants were so rigidly time-gated is that it was your core power progression, right? It was your Soulbind tree traversal. And so if we let you just say, hey, I want to binge for a weekend and do a bunch of stuff, well, that would have become the mandatory way for every competitive player to play. But in a world where this is more about, unlocking new bits of story, content, other types of more open-ended progression, I think we can be much more flexible.
I think that's awesome. It's really good to hear you say that there's story connected to those unlocks as well. You know what I'm going to have to ask you, though, don't you? Is it account-wide, that progress?
So that's a good question, and I think details of that are something, again, like it's going to depend. I think, again, philosophically, if you've unlocked a cosmetic reward on one character, that should be available across your account. If you have unlocked access to a new set of quests or a new repeatable event in the outdoor world, that should be available across your account. Might there be things that we put in this track certainly if you earn a helm that is an eye level 300 whatever helm, no, that won't be available across your account, right? So that's the stuff we have to figure out, but it should still adhere to the general philosophies that we're trying to follow.
I'm surprisingly happy to hear that answer. I think that's a really good answer. Thank you. I'm really glad that I put on some clothes for this. I didn't have to. No one would have known. Awesome. So that's really good to hear. And with that kind of progression, and is there any kind of systems that you thought really worked in Shadowlands that you're going to move over into Dragonflight? People are thinking like creation catalysts, stuff like that.
I think that's one of them, though. I think we probably don't want to get into the habit of having to reinvent a new foozle in every zone with some magical currency that's there just to craft tier sets or whatever from that tier. We're still figuring out exactly how this will work, but I think that professions are actually probably a really good long-term home for that sort of device where, over the course of a tier, after the first few weeks of collecting and trying to piece your set together, long-term, what if you could take your plate helm that you earned from that raid or from a Mythic dungeon and take it to a skilled blacksmith with a reagent who can then make that into a set helm? That's the sort of thing that we'd love to carry forward. I think making tier sets accessible to a variety of play styles, and also having, as kind of we mentioned earlier, kind of pre-planning that catch-up mechanism / RNG backstop that can come into play partway through the tier is something we're really happy with.
That's really interesting kind of evolution of the system. Is there going to be a mission table?
No current plans for a mission table, no.
The internet, just an intake of breath there. Steve, when it comes to the story of the expansion, it's been said that you planned the story of Shadowlands to be a story in 3 acts. Do you know where the story of Dragonflight ends up right now, and are you kind of working towards it, or are you sort of freewheeling a bit more? Not that there's a wrong answer, just interested in your process.
Yeah, I mean, the way that I kind of work as a storyteller, I like to know where something's going. So we talk a lot about story on this team. I have multiple meetings a week with multiple people, and we talk a lot about how we want this to end. What kind of feeling do we want to evoke in people when this expansion comes to a conclusion? And so we have this pretty epic ending that I think will feel really good for players, that will involve these characters that we've been adventuring alongside throughout the story. So yeah, we have that story, but there's also a lot of freedom along the way in terms of you don't want to be so overly prescriptive with what you're doing that you shut yourself off from opportunities. This is something that we talk about in voice sessions all the time with actors, right? We write these lines, but we don't want to tell them how to say them because the magic comes from how an actor interprets what those words are. And it's the same way with story. When you have this whole team of really talented people, really talented quest designers, narrative designers, content designers, systems, all this stuff that comes together, you want to let those folks kind of take the building blocks that you hand them and see what's going to come of that. And so while you drive towards certain things and you have these key moments in mind and this key progression for the story, you want that flexibility in there to discover things that you didn't even anticipate. And that's the real joy, is when I'm talking with some designer who's talking about a quest line that they want to build, and something rises out of that's just magical that I never would have thought of, but it brings so much to this kind of tapestry of the game. That's just super exciting. So that's the stage we're at now, is we've got quest people, content people, narrative people, all building stuff in this world, and it's like planting seeds that grow right before your eyes. So it's a really great experience, and I think a very organic way to tell stories.
Presumably you're kind of looking very much at the sort of the initial kind of leveling and story experience of the Dragon Isles at the moment. Do you have a certain way you want players to feel? If you had to sum up what you wanted to make players feel in that initial kind of leveling process, for example, through the Isles, what would it be?
Yeah, we want players to feel a sense of optimism and hope that there's so much potential in the future of the Dragon Isles and the future of Dragonkind and all these characters that are wrapped up in this storyline. And it makes you care about who you're adventuring alongside, and you care about this place because it's so steeped in the mystique, the mythology of dragons, and you get to learn not just what they fight for, but what they care about, what drives each of the flights, what is in their hearts and their bond to this world and to each other. So it's really about wanting to give that experience to the player, feeling connected to these characters and to this place.
Awesome. And would you say the odds are good that we'll stay on the Dragon Isles for the entirety of the expansion, or would you be surprised if we kind of went elsewhere at some point?
Well, now you're asking very spoilery things, but thematically, this expansion is about the dragons and the threats they face and the goals they have, and what we and other heroes of Azeroth are doing to help them, or in the case of some dragons that might have ill intent, of trying to stop them. So it is very much rooted in the dragons. We're not, the story always touches on lots of things because WoW is a big game and the story is very big. So there's lots of room for little side stories and things like that. But the main storyline is about the dragons, about the dragon aspects and what their fate is and the kind of destiny that they're weaving.
That's awesome. I'm going to come back to that in just a moment. I'd like to go back to just sort of some in-game things at the moment. There's been a lot of talk about Mythic Plus and the Mythic Plus seasons and the distribution of the dungeons over Mythic Plus in seasons 1 and 2 in particular. And it being widely reported that in season 1 we'll have 4 of the presumably 8 new dungeons from Dragonflight, combined with 4 time-walking dungeons, and then again vice versa in season 2. Ian, I think there's like a concern in the community that the time walking Mythic Plus dungeons included will be ones that we've kind of been playing a lot recently. Is there a desire in the team to use older dungeons that haven't been used as Mythic Plus before to fill those gaps?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think certainly Shadowlands and even I think Battle for Azeroth dungeons are all kind of off limits for these purposes. I think they're far too recent. Long term, I think a lot of where we're starting to look is, Mists of Pandaria had some fun dungeons that, had challenge mode versions, but never Mythic Plus. And I don't know that I would describe it as literally time walking, because I think we're open to making some tweaks to the dungeons to support modern gameplay and Mythic Plus as needed. But I mean, yeah, the idea here really is to set ourselves up and to set players up for long-term variety over the course of the expansion. And each new Mythic Plus season not just being some slight tweak to routing based on the new seasonal affix of a dungeon you've already run 100 times, but rather a whole new puzzle to solve. And I mean, again, honestly, I would love to be able to say that we could create 8 new dungeons every few months. That is not something we're able to do. One day maybe, but that's not something we're able to do today. And so by mixing up old and new, I think we can, and hopefully continuing to add new dungeons over the course of the expansion. That's something that we're going to be able to deliver, where both itemization-wise and gameplay-wise, every season is a fresh experience, the same way raiders have a fresh experience every season. You shouldn't have to refarm the same trinket from the same dungeon every 5 or 6 months.
I really like the intent behind that. I think sort of refarming old gear every season, or the same gear every season, is one of the major things that is fatiguing about Mythic Plus. Can you see yourself going all the way back to classic dungeons?
That's unlikely. Maybe certainly, in a world where we're completely reworking or reimagining some older dungeons as we did in some later expansions, that version could hold up. But I think both in terms of visual fidelity and just mechanical complexity, those dungeons I think wouldn't be suitable for modern gameplay. I think internally the team probably draws the bar at Mists of Pandaria and onwards in terms of what still feels consistent with how we design dungeons today. That's not to say that we couldn't go earlier than that, but we would also rework the dungeon significantly if we did so.
Cool. Sounds like fun. Like I say, these questions come from the community, so I want to kind of do a relatively quick fire bunch on the Dracthyr, just to get some kind of information out there that people have been wondering about. Obviously, in combat form, they're using their claws and their wings and their tails and their jaws and all sorts, and that's one thing. But obviously, they will have weapons equipped. Do we know what kind of loadouts they're looking at yet? Are they using int staves? Are they using agility maces? What's going on?
So I think they're as a caster class, range DPS and healer, they're definitely an intellect class, and both specializations are that. In terms of weapons, this again, all subject to change, but I think initial thoughts are probably what shamans can use minus shields plus swords, if that makes sense. So like dagger, fist weapon, mace, staves, axes, and that's the current thinking.
Awesome. And when it comes to kind of like older content and going back as a Dracthyr, how will that work? Particularly in terms of Mage Tower. Will they be able to go into the Mage Tower?
That is unlikely, at least initially. I think there are certain things that we will update. I know everyone's eagerly waiting to see what the Nefarian class call is when Nefarian encounters this mysterious Dracthyr creature. And I think we'll make sure that they'll be able to run Torghast when Torghast launches. When Dragonflight comes out, and that's still actually initially relevant content when you're level 60. I think we want to make sure there's workarounds such that they can do the Legion expansion content if they want to go do that, but they're not going to get their own artifact weapon. We're not going to kind of retcon an odd story that involved Dracthyr somehow fighting the Legion back then. I think long-term stuff like Mage Tower we would want to explore, but that's not something that's going to be able to happen for Dragonflight launch.
Okay, that's understandable, I guess. And Steve, there's been a lot of talk about customization of the Dracthyr as well, and concerns around that, but also just like wanting to know more about it. Can you talk a bit more about to what extent players will be able to customize their characters?
Yeah, the art team has really done an amazing array of customizations for both the Dracthyr form and the Visage form. And I believe we've got a blog post in the works where some of our artists are going to talk through some of those options in more detail. Because really, even the deep dive was really just able to scratch the surface on some of the things. And the game is in development, so more of those options are coming into the UI every day. So they'll be able to give a much more in-depth kind of look at what's going to be available. But it's a super customizable both forms, and I really like the Visage form a lot because of just the variety that you'll see in those. So that's a personal favorite of mine.
What's the lore thinking behind that? Because obviously they use the sort of the human female-based form and the blood elf male-based form, but the facial features seem to be kind of purposely changed a little bit from that. Are they literal kind of human forms, or what's the lore behind that?
Well, the lore behind the Dracthyr is that they're not made from one singular mortal race, nor one singular dragonflight, right? Like Neltharion took the best aspects of dragons, allowed them to tap into the magic of all 5 flights, and he looked at the mortal races who were very young at the time. When you think back to that period of Azeroth's history, you had Tauren, you had trolls, you had night elves rising up from the trolls, and some other early races like that. And so those were really the building blocks that he drew from. And so the Dracthyr represents not only a mixture of the magic of the flights, but a mixture of those traits from some of those early races. So that's why they have a distinctive appearance that's different from what the dragons did, which was to pick one particular race that they wanted to use to represent themselves in the world, and then transformed into that as their Visage form. The Dracthyr come at it from a different angle.
So they, unlike dragons, they haven't chosen their form. That's just sort of who they are.
Well, that's going to be part of the storyline, is that when you awaken, you're in your draconic form. And there will come a point in the story where it becomes necessary, as you might imagine, to venture out into the larger world. And so that's the point where the Dracthyr have to tap into that mortality that is within them and use it to present their Visage form.
Awesome. And Ian, an Evoker tank spec, how likely is that, do you think, eventually?
Pretty unlikely. I think that...
But black dragons, though, Ian!
Wait, what about them?
They have scales which are used in tanking shields and swords, and there's loads of black dragon links to kind of tanking items throughout the game. So that's one of the reasons why people are kind of sort of coming down on the side that it's something they maybe should have.
I'm going to say that's a tenuous logical connection. The fact that the hides of dragons can be used to make sturdy things. I know
that sounds like a question for Steve Danuser, honestly, whether that's tenuous or not. I don't know.
No, so I think really this is a spellcaster class at its core. While there are 4 specialization specific abilities, the core abilities that are shared across both specs, lots of them have cast times. All of that doesn't lend itself well to being in melee range, directly being punched by an enemy. And as any tank can attest, anything that has a cast time is just miserable. That's not just the fantasy of what this class is about. Options for them going forward, I think we're certainly, while I have 2 specializations, I don't want to close the door to them ever getting a third, but I don't know that tank is a direction that we would go here in particular. Our prior hero classes have all had tank options. We think that that's been fairly well covered over the years. We'd like to give range DPS some love this time.
Awesome. And kind of hinting back to something we were talking about earlier, I'm assuming they're not getting a class hall in Legion or an artifact weapon?
Correct. And I think some of this is, Chromie time only goes so far. Canonically, Dracthyr were not around in Azeroth back then. They were not known to the races of the world during Legion. And so the Legion story doesn't really reflect their presence.
Awesome. And I'm glad you brought up Chromie time, actually, because that's one of our community questions on this list. Are you planning any more alterations to Chromie time aside from just letting it scale to whatever the new kind, or whatever just below the new max is every expansion? Do you think that's a system that is working at the moment, or do you have any planned kind of changes or iterations for it?
Overall, I think it's working. I think the intent is to roll Shadowlands into it and have that for alt be one of an array of options alongside other expansions that you can use to level a new character from 10 to 58 or 60 to jump into Dragonflight. Down the line, I think, while for now BFA remains the default experience for true new players who venture off from Stormwind and Orgrimmar into that expansion, that may be something we update down the line.
Is that confirmation? I'm sorry to interrupt you. It's just that's been something that we've had sort of conflicting reports on in some dev interviews. It is definitely staying as BFA for new players.
Definitely staying as BFA. And I think that's conceptually, Shadowlands is a challenging new player expansion. I think trying to sell the idea of, congratulations, you've escaped Exile's reach as one of the survivors. Now we need you to go into Super Hell with Lady Jaina and, save the world. That's a bit of a rapid escalation versus venture off with our diplomatic force to Kultiris/Zandalar and, work on behalf of your faction. That feels like slightly more continuity.
Awesome. And is there any plans to the training dungeon on Exile's Reach works really, really well, where you go in with sort of computer controlled sort of other members of your party in a dungeon at the end there. Is that something you might expand into the leveling experience for solo players?
It's something we're definitely open to expanding. I think there's just a bunch of challenges. That dungeon was built with that in mind. And I think getting to a point where AI NPCs could actually run, let alone tank or heal, one of our kind of mainstream dungeons, even the BFA ones that was designed with mechanics that were only built for real players, is that's a much more challenging thing to accomplish in a way that doesn't end up being really frustrating. Because I think the second your NPC companion wipes your group, you're not really thankful that you have that instead of a real player. You're probably more resentful that we gave it to you. So,
and you can't kick them.
Yeah.
That's the thing. You can't kick them out.
I've been kicked by them though, weirdly. So strange. Going back to the Dragon Isles very quickly, we've got some a bunch of questions about dragon riding that I want to get to in just a second. But just before we do, I'd like to touch on some story stuff again. We've had talk about Khadgar coming back as a main character in Dragon Isles, or certainly a prominent character. Can you give us any hints or information on other characters that we might know or not know that we'll be spending a lot of time with in the expansion?
Well, yeah, one of the fun things that we're doing this time is because we looked at the instigating events of what takes us to the Dragon Isles as a non-dragon race. What's pulling us there, and obviously we want to help our friends the dragons. But this isn't like say Pandaria, where you had Alliance and Horde who were going in also to make a land grab, like to prevent your rival from obtaining control of this new place. That's not what we're doing here in Dragonflight. And so that's why we chose the Explorers League and the Reliquary to join forces and make this feel like a true expedition, not a military strike. And so because of that, that gives us access to some other characters, some members of those groups that don't often get the spotlight. So there'll be some fun there in players will get to know some characters that they aren't necessarily familiar with. But there will be some of our major heroes that will make appearances throughout the storyline. But we really did want to focus mainly on the dragons and their storylines, because we've built so many things up over the years with, say, Rathian, where he's been looking for this place, he's been wrestling with his own desires to lead a renewed Black Dragonflight, but yet the doubts that he has about his origins and the legacy of his father, and all of the aspects have questions like that are really interesting to explore. So we wanted to make them the focus of a lot of the narrative weight of storytelling, but we have other characters coming in that also want to adventure alongside in the Dragon Isles with us.
Will we be seeing any of Kalia Menethil?
Well, how to say this without, those of you who have been watching the data mines of our 925 patch know that there is something that takes place in Tirisfal Glades, and some of that may allow us to catch up with Kalia Menethil and delve into some storylines that affect the Forsaken and others who've been touched by the magic of death and what it's done to their culture. So there's definitely some stuff coming up that will be of interest.
I wasn't going to ask this, but that just leads on so perfectly, so I kind of have to now. Yeah, sorry, it's kind of your fault. Everything is your fault, Steve, don't you know?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, it's fair.
Twitter tells me.
Or mine after this, I think. But you've done such great work as a team with the customization options in Shadowlands, and a lot of the loosening of restrictions that, for lore reasons and what have you, always use an excuse not to have certain customizations. What is stopping Dark Ranger customizations?
Well, when we put out new character customizations, think back to what we did with the Night Elves in 8.1 when they were battling for Darkshore. Tyrande calls upon the power of the Night Warrior, and then if you played through that storyline, then you've got access to some new customization options. So we like to do it when it's thematic for a particular case. Now, obviously, we don't do it every time. It's a kind of a rare and special thing. But what I would say is that when there is a right opportunity for something like that's absolutely something that we'd consider. And I won't go into any more details than that.
I think that's very fair. I'd like to ask you about dragon riding, if that's okay, and particularly some sort of just clarifications on some of the things I think some of the community, myself included, are a little bit confused about. Can you, Ian, just explain for the uninitiated what the difference between dragon riding and just flight as we recognize it now is?
Sure. So, flight as it has existed since Burning Crusade is effectively swimming through the air. It treats the air as you would treat water in our game, and you can move faster in it. There's no momentum or physics or gravity, and you can just move around at a fixed rate. I think a lot of what we've said about flying over the years does, I think, still hold in terms of its potential to shrink the world, to eliminate a feeling of danger or exploration when you can fly right over the enemy citadel before you've ever been there and skip past guards and other barriers. You lose a little bit of something of taking in a place. But long term, of course, we understand that convenience is paramount, and you just want to get around. You want to do your quests, you want to farm your stuff, you want to collect things, you want to herb, mine, and we want flying to be there for you. So the pattern that we've, of course, fallen into is unlocking flying some number of months into a new expansion. I think that's still, that long-term unrestricted flight is still the plan for Dragonflight, and the ability to use all of your mounts. We don't want to make your existing collection gather dust on the shelf. But at launch, we want to do something different and exciting this time around that isn't just, all right, you're stuck on the ground for X months, because it's an expansion about dragons. It's an expansion about the home of dragons. And so while within the Dragon Isles, very early on, I think in the first or second zone, as you're leveling up, literally the first day of the expansion, you will gain the trust of a dragon companion that is native to the Dragon Isles and upon whom you can call within the Dragon Isles. This Drake is still a fledgling flyer of sorts and has limited stamina initially, but also has the ability to navigate in a much more dynamic, exciting way than the flying that we've known before. And so that means, as we've seen in some of the initial video clips, momentum, gathering speed as you dive towards the ground, and then using that to carry you forward. But it's not initially sort of unlimited, unrestricted flight. There is a stamina bar that will be depleted as you're gaining altitude or as you're doing special moves. And the ability to, as you become a more skilled dragon rider, as your bond with your Drake grows, increase and loosen those restrictions and get around more and more frequently and more easily. But long term, standard flying is still the plan. We think this is going to be a much better experience, a much more exciting experience, day one, week one, however.
So will standard flying, as in you can now fly your flying mounts around the Dragon Isles, be something that is definitely kind of opened up in the expansion?
Down the line, yes. I think, again, as mentioned, we understand players have prized collections of hundreds of mounts that they have, are very attached to. We don't want to create an expansion where you're never going to be able to use those. It's just not part of the day one experience.
And from your kind of design point of view, the kind of what we've seen in the footage of swooping and what I imagine is very much kind of the later stage, maybe even like the end stage of dragon flying, where you're very much being like Alexstraza in the opening cinematic. Do you have a time frame for when you think players will get to that point?
Honestly, a lot of that stuff that you're seeing should be the very early experience. I think it should feel fun and exciting and awesome from minute one, but have some time restrictions on how long you can do that for, things like that. The intent is not to give you an experience that feels lame and then have you work to make it feel good. It should feel good from the start and then only get better from there.
Awesome. Okay, so relatively soon. And in terms of how your dragon is leveled up, is that through completing quests generally, or is it kind of like a currency that you grind out, or an experience bar, or is there a plan for that at the moment?
That is to be decided. I think philosophically we want to be flexible with that. Again, recognizing while this isn't a power system, it is still a core system that players of all play styles will want to do. And if we tie progression within the system to one specific type of content, then if you don't like that type of content, you don't like the system, and that hurts WoW as a whole for you. And so that's something we're going to, we want to see how this is actually playing out and stay flexible with based on feedback over the course of beta.
Awesome. And in terms of best case scenario, Dragonflight is the best thing ever. It looks awesome. It looks super engaging and really fun, and makes, best case scenario, it's going to make traversing the environment part of the gameplay loop rather than something that has to be overcome, and that's awesome. I really appreciate the design intention behind it. And with that in mind, people are going to want to use it outside of Dragon Isles if it's that much fun. Is that something that you plan to allow?
Long term, that's certainly a possibility. I think this is a system that's initially built for Dragon Isle, and the environment is built for this system. But as with anything, I think I would say this is, unlike most of our other evergreen improvements, this is an expansion-specific feature. But like nearly every expansion-specific feature, that is very subject to change based on feedback. Like Mythic Plus was originally a Legion feature, and then turns out, everyone was like, nope, we want this going forward. We made that happen. So I think that's something where we don't want to make an upfront commitment, but it's very much a possibility.
Awesome. I'm going to come back to an element of that in just a moment, but I just want to ask Steve, because I miss you. I'm thinking a lot about dragons and our experience with dragons, and Sindragosa being apparently quite a prominent character in the upcoming expansion. But then I think I've got a Death Knight, and I kind of killed all her kids. And is that something that she's going to hold against me?
Well, the Sindragosa that you will be interacting with through the course of Dragon Isles is.
I meant Alexstraza. I'm so sorry. I misspoke there.
Okay. All right. Okay. Alexstraza. Yeah, she Alexstraza's seen a lot of carnage done to dragons, both from other dragons and from the mortal races of the world. She is an optimistic person. She is a person who is looking towards the future of her kind and the future of Azeroth and those things. But she will definitely acknowledge some of the hard feelings towards some of those quests. And I think that if you played a Death Knight and engaged with some of that content, then she might have some distinctive things to say to you that she wouldn't necessarily say to the random elven hunter or whoever else might come along. So we really like doing that kind of conditional quest text, that if you've got a particular history that's relevant to a character, that they call that out. And so we're being mindful of that in the Dragon Isles with Alexstraza and other characters as well.
And with cross-faction play being something that comes into play in the next expansion, are you planning on including that in the storyline at all, making it sort of something that's mentioned by the players and the factions? And is it going to be the basis of any story?
Well, we feel like the armistice that was signed at the end of Battle for Azeroth was kind of the teeing up point for where this is now. And so when you kick off the expansion, and this takes place, some of this will be further expanded in our pre-patch content, but we'll definitely catch players up and remind them of kind of the state of where the factions are at, that this is a cooperative venture that they're going into to help the dragons and explore the Dragon Isles. And so we'll acknowledge the fact that this isn't everything's forgotten and we're all just best friends now. There's varying levels of resentments and distrustfulness. You saw some of that if you in the aftermath of the final chapter 8 of Eternity's End. You saw some of those feelings if you talk to Greymane and Lorthamar. You see that there's a lot of history that runs deep there, and so that will be acknowledged. But again, it is a period of kind of hopefulness and optimism. So we'll get to see some of these characters working together that in the past it would have been unthinkable for these rivals to go side by side and work towards a shared goal.
I would say that in some ways, really, this is less about the narrative adapting to the new mechanic. I think this is more the mechanic is an adaptation to the way the narrative has already been for years. Really, in everything except the heart of Battle for Azeroth. But even even there was still cooperation between Thrall and Jaina and others. We're just acknowledging the situational cooperation to overcome common threats that has been a hallmark of Warcraft throughout its history, and letting players do it too.
And with that in mind, will cross-faction guilds be something that could happen?
It's something that could happen. I think there are a significant number of technical challenges. And I think part of how we're rolling out this feature, there's a reason why it's called cross-faction instances and not cross-faction play. It's because there's 17 years of game that was built with a lot of assumptions about what factions could and couldn't do and when they could and couldn't be present. And so there's a lot to unravel there. But I think we're taking a step down this path, and I think it's probably not going to be the only step, but that's something we'll both be guided by the community and our internal progress in engineering terms.
Fair. And we don't have loads of time left, so I really want to talk to you about Endgame. You've talked, and I think the community is really happy to hear about, the lack of kind of borrowed power is how you would term it, I suppose. But that's something that the Endgame of WoW has been so based on in recent expansions. How do you feel, what shape do you see the Endgame taking for like day-to-day play for a player logging in?
I think that, honestly, in a lot of ways, Eternity's End and Zereth Mortis are pretty close to that already. We didn't carry forward most of the Shadowlands systems. There weren't new soulbind levels for you to go earn by raising your renown further or whatever else. There's gear, there is outdoor progression. There's some universal currencies that you're using to further your shared goals there. And I think that has felt pretty good. That's certainly, I think, what we've heard from a wide range of players. And that's the foundation, with just a lot more variety, as we were talking about earlier, in terms of the range of factions. And it's not just, the cipher system is the only thing, but rather a half dozen things that you can choose among, with different goals that complement our core of, raid, dungeon, PvP gameplay for those who are focused on that. But I think we also want to make sure that the outdoor world experience stands on its own for players for whom that is the game they love and the game they most enjoy, and they're not interested in pushing Mythic Plus or whatever else. And I think some of the gear progression we've seen through the cipher system in Zereth Mortis, access to tier sets, those are the sorts of things we want to carry forward into the Dragonflight Endgame from the start.
Would you combine those with a new sort of iteration of the Great Vault? Is the Great Vault something that's going to come back next expansion?
Yes, the Great Vault is something we're carrying forward. There may be some tweaks to it. I think no major changes or overhaul to it. I think incrementally it's felt like a clear improvement upon the single item chest from Legion and BFA. I think the improved constellation package for fallback if you don't have something you want has been working out fairly well in the last few weeks, since we added socketers and other items to that range of options. But yeah, I think that's largely, there'll be a new version of it. It's not the literal Ouroboros Great Vault, maybe a dragon horde of some sort in the city of Valdrakken atop the Dragon Isles, but it'll be coming back.
Awesome. I have to address some rumors that have been going around the community from sources. You know how it is, that there might be a new allied race introduced at some point in this expansion early on. Is that something you can comment on?
We don't.
I'm asking about Tuskarr. I'm asking about Tuskarr. That's what I'm asking about. But it doesn't have to be. But I mean, it should be. But it doesn't have to be.
That would be impossible to balance, though, right? Because I think if we let you play something that's just
they balance perfectly. They've got a low center of gravity.
No, exactly. But no, that's like letting you play a Naru or play a Titan. Like, you can't just put, a supernatural power that's unstoppable alongside a mere orc or elf or human and expect the world to have any sense of cohesion. So maybe if we can get past that issue someday, but not right now.
Ian, you've done so well in this Q&A, honestly, and I think you've made a lot of friends, but I think you've just blown it right at the very end there. And it sounds like you're saying there aren't playable Tuskarr. So I'm going to move on from that. That's fine. I don't think you've said no yet, so I'm going to move on. Just to step away very quickly before we finish, we have had news that the Exploring Northrend book is kind of in the works and will be coming out. Steve, do you have anything you'd like to tell us about that?
Yeah, it's another in the ongoing saga of kind of this fictional exploration of the world and kind of catching up on some things that have changed since the expansion content where we delved into it. So it's this time we kind of adventure alongside some of the Bronzebeard brothers. So they all have ties to Northrend. We got to go into Titan Vault alongside Bran. We've got Myrddin was tied in with Frostmourne and the Arthas storyline, and of course Magni has ties to lots of Titan stuff that's there. So they made kind of ideal guides going through and seeing some of this land through their eyes. So it's going to be a really fun freewheeling sort of book that just catches up on a fan favorite location.
Awesome. I have to ask, there was kind of some controversy with the last book, the Kalimdor book, in terms of some elements of the community finding some tropes and what have you, maybe sort of not the best thought out. Was that something you as the team were aware of?
Well, the community certainly had called out some valid points there and gave us a lot to think about. And, we always strive to do better with every iteration of what we do. And so we're bearing those lessons in mind as we're working on the Northrend book and other books. We've done a lot lately, a lot of a time of introspection for lots of reasons. And one of the things that I've been really proud that the team has been doing is really trying to get better about and learn more about the way we represent cultures in our world, representations of that, and make sure that we're doing it the right way. So, for example, as we've been delving into Tuskarr stories, we met with some of the Inuit people and talked to them and got their perspective on, like, what is good representation? Like, how deep do we go with some of these ties to real world cultures in a way that is respectful and feels good? And so that's something that we're carrying forward into the game, something we will carry forward into our books and publications. And it's just something we really want to be respectful and mindful of those things so that we don't find ourselves in those situations again.
See, I knew I could ask you that because I thought you'd have a good answer for it, and you did. So thank you for that. And we're going to hard stop it in 30 seconds time. But I have one last question for Ian. And it's a translation issue. There was a German interview you did for Buffed where there's been a little bit of confusion as to what you actually said in terms of how far along this expansion is. Did you say that it's quite far along, or did you say that it's got quite far to go?
I think it's quite far along. I mean, we have alpha is coming soon. We have signups posted. There's a whole lot to show off and experience all around there. So soon TM, but
sounds
also
good
soon
to me.
Without the TM.
Awesome. Guys, there have been some really, really interesting answers to these questions today. I really appreciate you taking them straight from the community like this. It's been a really interesting way of kind of asking questions and getting answers. It's been lovely sitting here in my pants. I went to the bathroom at some point. I went out for a jog halfway through. I watched, some movie. It's been brilliant. It's been like so much nicer than doing BlizzCon. So we should do this again sometime. And I know that a lot of the answers that you've given are going to be celebrated in the community. So thank you for that, and thank you for your time. And I think we'll end it there. Is there anything else that you'd like to finish off on in terms of Dragonflight?
Honestly, just thank you all for the great questions. Thank you for tuning in, and thank you for your trust. And we hope to live up to it. And we have a lot more information to share. Can't wait to welcome you into the world formally soon. And let's make a great game together.
Yeah, the team is having a great time working on this expansion. It's got us really excited, and I think that excitement will carry over once you come into this world as well. So looking forward to it, and thanks everybody, and thanks for the great questions.
You've got me incredibly hyped, and as everyone knows, that's a really difficult thing to do. So thank you so much, and we're going to call it there. Thank you everyone for joining us.